So the next podcast is actually with the great Steve Winter, Nat Geo photographer. It's done from my hotel room in New York, basically. We couldn't find anywhere quieter, so it ended up in my hotel room. And it was with Steve Winter, big cat photographer, and Sharon Guynup, his partner in crime. Steve has been a Nat Geo photographer for over 2 decades now, specialising in wildlife and particularly big cats. This interview is particularly pertinent literally in the last couple of days because Sharon and Steve's work has, I think it was in 2019, featured around the captive tigers in the States and how there are more captive tigers in the States than actually left in the wild today. And that sort of came into contact with The Tiger King, which then developed into a Netflix series. And Sharon and Steve were involved in a lot of the questioning around that and reporting around that. And obviously only on the weekend just past now, Dog Antle, who also featured in that, has been arrested, I think by the FBI, and is being held for those crimes. So this is a fantastic interview with Steve and Sharon, and I hope you enjoy it from my bedroom in my hotel in New York. First of all, it's great to finally meet you both, which is fantastic, and in such remarkable surroundings in my hotel room, sitting on a sofa bed, which is great style. Sorry about that. But Nat Geo Explorer, just to rattle off some of your accolades, BBC Wildlife Photographer of the Year, BBC Wildlife Photojournalist of the Year, 2-time winner of Picture of the International Global Vision Award, first prize in Nature Story category in World Press Photo 2018-2014. I was quite jealous of that one. 16 minutes CBS, CNN, etc. You've done quite a few things. Natural World Safaris specialist leader, obviously.
Yes.
That's obviously the highlight. Yeah. But you've achieved a heck of a lot. You know, in terms of what you've done so far. You seem probably also one of the most laid back guys in the world as well, which you've always been a pleasure to work with, both of you, which is great. But it's sort of about 2 decades now you've been working in the sort of photography arena, photojournalism and stuff. Going back to the beginning, how did you get into it? What was the start for you? When did you pick up a camera?
Well, I picked up a camera when I was a kid because my dad was an amateur photographer, and then decided I wanted to be a photographer after going around the world when I was 21. I'd already left college once because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Yeah. I only knew how to take pictures, not really how to be a photographer per se. So I went to art school in San Francisco. And then when I left there, I got my real education by being an assistant to Nick Nichols.
Right, okay, yeah.
Way before he was ever at Geographic.
So Nick Nichols as Geo. Mega Transect, Mike Fay.
That Nick.
Right, okay.
So, every year Nick would put a tray together, a carousel tray of slides, and send it to Geographic. I was with him then, so I learned so much by being an apprentice or assistant to Nick. And then he thought that I should move to the East Coast and work for the German magazines if I wanted to get into Geographic.
Right.
So I moved. I met Sharon the first weekend, and that was it. We've been together
in more ways
ever
than one.
Yeah. And ended up at Black Star as a photojournalist. And after being there for a year or so, they said, "Hey, we just got a corporate job," and that's all she needed to say was corporate job. To a guy that did daily assignments for news magazines and business magazines, and she said it was for Merck Pharmaceuticals they're trying to find new drugs in the rainforest, and they're working with the National Biodiversity Institute of Costa Rica. And said, "You do work for National Geographic. Why don't you go?" And I go, "I've never been to the jungle. I don't know anything about it." But, I talked to Sharon about it. We decided to do it. And then she got 8 stories for Science Magazine for photography, because she was still a photographer then.
I was going to say, what was your background at the time, Sharon? Was it?
Well, I was a photographer, solely until mid-career, when I went to graduate school and studied science, health, and environmental reporting and science at NYU.
Right.
So, my background is photography. I still shoot,
Yeah.
video, multimedia, but now I both write and photograph. So that first trip, when we went down there, we had never stepped into rainforest before, and Costa Rica, in the heart of the forest where there isn't tourists, it's magical. And
Yeah.
we're out with biologists, him, out with these people that were collecting all kinds of samples deep in the forest, and I was photographing stories about researchers studying everything from, bellbirds and quetzals to dolphins,
And that bellbirds quetzal, that guy was the first story that I did for National Geographic. It was the second published story, but
I'll never forget the first night we spent in this cabin in the rainforest that was a biological research station. In the morning, we got up, we were all ready to go into the forest. We took a few steps in, it gets really dark, the canopy is very thick, and we're looking around, it's like, I think we should wait to go out with the scientists later.
I said, let's go back to breakfast. We're supposed to meet the ant guy, that works up in the canopy with the ant colonies.
So we did.
We did.
But, Latin America became, many, many years' work, and then, much later, Steve and I both worked extensively in India and in Asia, and then finally Africa.
Yeah.
So, over the years, we've had a chance to see quite a few different ecosystems and have the opportunity to be in the field with people that know these landscapes like their backyard.
But you formed quite a formidable couple then, in terms of what you do and how you work, in terms of obviously from a writing and photographic point of view, and you're both involved in that. Has that been one of the reasons for your success, do you think, in terms of you're a great team to sort of send in somewhere?
I must respond to that.
Yeah.
Steve is an amazing photographer, and it's not just because I'm his longtime partner that I say that. And much of his work was independent of me. We collaborate sometimes. Likewise, I've done lots and lots of work that's independent, of him. But we have had the chance to be in the field together a lot. And say if we're doing multimedia, I can write the script and do the interviews. He'll do the filming. I can do the sound. So there, and if he's shooting something and I'm with him, I can hold a light if it needs to be lit, or So there's a lot of ways that we can interact and help each other, do our work. So that is a real gift.
Yeah.
And I think it's been real important for things like the videos that we've done that have ended up on Geographic that have made a difference. Like Sharon worked on the Tiger Temple in Thailand, and then came in and they wanted her to do a video, and like, you can't do a video and do all the interviews, so I'm coming with you. I know the place. It's sketchy.
Yeah.
I was there on the tiger story.
Yeah.
And so we started that, and she just never gave up, wrote 4 articles, and gave the government enough information that they came in and closed the place down. So
because of
things
of
like that
trafficking.
were great together. The U.S. tiger story.
And we'll come on to that, because I think that's an interesting one.
That's another thing. It gets to the point doing all these stories that, number one, we want to be working together, number one, and it's very important that we have that opportunity to work together, because we can get more done.
Yeah.
But we want to do stories that have impact and that create change in the end.
That's
because you spend so much time, to just teach people about an animal they already know about.
Yeah.
I always try to do different things, but to create change is easy to say. But once you do it and things happen like that, it's really satisfying, and you know that you're walking away and it's done great.
Yeah.
So, in terms of that, there's a number of stories that we both have done that have had impact, but one of the really amazing ones is that, Steve did a story on cougars just in the United States. And part of that, he wanted to cover the cougars that are in California. And he really wanted to get a photograph of a cat under the Hollywood sign as an iconic image. And the scientists laughed at him. Then, somehow, a cat made it across the 10-lane 101 and got into Griffiths Park, which is an urban park in LA, and the Hollywood sign is up on the hill. Steve set up camera traps, worked them for 15 months, and got a picture of that cat under the Hollywood sign. And that cat became, and that image, became the kind of poster child for the need for a wildlife overpass to connect the last two remaining protected areas. That corridor is breaking ground this spring.
Really?
So, you look at
$88 million privately funded. Well, it's called the Annenberg.
And that's one
Wallace Annenberg. So
because
they gave a lot of money.
That's one of the standout images, and we'll come on to that more in terms of the camera trapping and your style, but that's one of the standout images that I have in my head of yours, Steve, is the cougars and, with the Hollywood sign. I think it's one of that and your snow leopard images.
Yeah.
Are absolutely stunning. And that sort of, how did you get into the niche that you're in? Because you are the big cat guy, really.
Well, in the end, I always say that I didn't choose big cats. Big cats chose me, just because we were trying to figure this out when we were doing the tiger book for National Geographic.
That's Tigers Forever, is that?
Yeah, and we're trying to, how actually did I get started in that? And it was from that first guy that Sharon had the assignment from Science, George Powell, ornithologist, ended up with WWF for 20 plus years, and he gave me the idea for the story. And I was all alone in the cloud forest on top of a mountain in Guatemala, and as I would walk back to the biological station, one room shack where I was
going to say this was not some high tech.
No, it was literally a one room shack. George said we cut down one log and built two buildings, one for the scientists, one to sleep in. And it was like caveman stuff, because I had to look up what primordial actually meant, because the hair on the back of my head would stand up, hair on my arms would stand up when I'm walking back, and then you'd look around, you're in a cloud forest. Just profusion of life. You can't see, 10 feet behind you or 3 meters or whatever. Something was following me. And one night it came and visited me, and in the end I pick up the walkie-talkie to call after something walked to my door, scratched under the door, then sniffed, and I called the guy that I was working with, who was down at the mountain in the farmhouse watching his brothers and sisters, because his dad was in the hospital. And I told him what had happened. He said, "Oh, don't worry, Steve, it's just a black panther." And it's like, dude, how come I've been here 5 weeks and you didn't tell me that there was a black panther? That was why I was getting this feeling that something was following me. And he just said, we didn't want to worry you. And he brought me this gun the next morning. I said, Juan Carlos, if I shoot this, it'll blow up in my face and kill me. The cat didn't bother me. He just walked to my door and scratched and sniffed. He didn't try to open the handle or anything. It was a handle I could have opened, but it was locked.
So that was literally how they...
Then I came back, didn't have a story for Nat Geo, which was a very good lesson. You don't finish a story without having another one to walk into. And then I saw a picture on the web of a cowboy who had taken the first photograph of a jaguar in the United States. He was a mountain lion hunting guide, and he took out the president of Orvis and his daughter on a photo safari to photograph mountain lions. 3 hours, his dogs were tracking something, and they get the cat on top of a rock, and he goes, "Oh my God, it's a jaguar." He'd spent his life trying to see a jaguar 5 miles north of the Mexico border in Arizona. And listed on that article was Dr. Alan Rabinowitz from Wildlife Conservation Society. So I cold called him, and luckily we got on together.
Who was then Pantera, Alan, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, first he was WCS, then Panthera. And I just asked him, do you think it'd be possible to do a jaguar story? Because Nat Geo had never done a jaguar story, never done a story on the third largest cat.
Because they were pretty impossible to see at the time, weren't
Yeah, impossible.
Yeah.
You know, like many cats, cougars, snow leopards, or whatever.
And that's what I said to him, like, don't you think there's a good reason there's never been a story done on it? You really want to do this?
Pushing the boundaries.
And I failed for like 18 months, and then I put the word out to a bunch of South American scientists. Hey, does anybody know where you can see jaguars? Got an email back from some guy who said, I just found a place. It's south of where George Schaller and Peter Crawshaw did the original jaguar study in the late 70s. It's called the Pantanal. You come now because I'm only going to be here for 2 more weeks because I just got the biological scholarship from the Brazilian government for the Imperial College of London. Went, and with 3 pictures I had in that first story, after that people started coming there because people knew that I had pictures from the Pantanal in the first jaguar
So it was
story.
feasible.
And that created all the tourism on jaguars now.
Exactly.
And it is the oasis for jaguars throughout their range because no one will kill one of our cats. A study was done in 2017 that all the cows in the area are only worth $2,000 in their whole lifetime, but each jaguar in the area brings $108,000 every year in ecotourism income. So nobody's going to kill one of the cats because they have a brother, an uncle, an aunt, or somebody that works in the tourism industry in that area.
So is that what motivates you in your photography? Not ecotourism, but it's not just images for you, is it?
Well, as soon as I got there, I found out that they all said, well, you have to photograph the cowboys because every one of these cowboys carries guns, and they think the only good jaguar is a dead jaguar because every dead cow is the fault of a jaguar. I felt this to be ridiculous. The woman I ended up working with after that biologist went to the Imperial College of London. Her boss was who? Alan Rabinowitz.
Yeah.
So I said, Alan, you ought to do the first ever GPS SAT college study, which I learned from him what the hell a GPS SAT college actually was. Because I knew nothing. I'd been a photojournalist, you know. So to me, it was like, why spend all this time? I just failed for 18 months away from my family. Now I'm in Brazil. There's cats here, but all the cats are being killed by cowboys. And I'd come from UNICEF before that. Originally, that's how I got started, and Geographic saw my pictures. And it's like, why work on something if somebody's just going to come kill it?
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense to me at all that I wouldn't step out, ask this guy who is my friend now to fund this project. And we were on a ranch with intelligent owners, former mayor of Rio, by the way, and so I said, hey, if you're going to do it anywhere, these people will understand the end result. The end result was only 1% of jaguars were actually killing cattle.
Really?
Because there's
And
food everywhere.
A very small percentage.
Anybody that's been to the Pantanal knows you can't even look down a riverbank without seeing tons of capybara and caiman. Caiman's their number 1 food source in the north, and capybara.
So what happened, as a result, is that that data was shared with ranchers, and ranchers realized it was disease and getting stuck in the mud and drowning and all kind of natural causes that were
You're in a
taking
wetland,
out some percentage of their cows in the largest wetland in the world, and many of them were persuaded to stop killing jaguars, and then ecotourism came in, which again was another really positive impact. Those jaguars now are worth more alive than dead.
Yeah.
So it's really saved jaguars in that one area.
So and it's always difficult, isn't it, balancing travel with conservation, etc. You're, I don't know, fans of ecotourism in terms of you think it can be used as a positive sort of sign in terms of, I always use the example of Diane Fossey with the mountain gorillas. She obviously wasn't a fan of it at the beginning, but I think you could pretty much categorically say if it hadn't happened with mountain gorillas, they probably wouldn't be around these days. So I think it's a great example of where it's worked. But it's a very difficult subject and topic to manage, isn't it? It's very complicated.
It is, but I think in the end, I always say local people need to benefit from living with predators. And the easiest way for them to benefit, besides livestock insurance, which is a very mixed bag, is ecotourism.
Yeah.
And so I've seen it in many instances. Jaguars was when I came back and saw that, when Panthera first hired me to go down, then they hired me for 4 years. I was blown away. It's like there's boats everywhere. This has totally changed because of those pictures I got. One of them was actually not on the river. It was in the ranch where Teddy Roosevelt hunted jaguar back in 1913. But then you go to snow leopards, and one of the great programs that was working then was the village trekking program, that was all part of the something I helped start, which was the vaccine program for all the villages, sheep and goats and things like that. We would vaccinate their animals as long as they promised not to kill snow leopards, and then in the summertime, trekkers would come through and they'd pay 500 rupees a night to stay in one of the homes.
Yeah.
You know,
was that Rumbak Valley area? Was that Rumbak? Was that
Rumbak? Yeah. Then they started doing it in Spiti, which is south of there. So Rumbak started doing it in a couple other places, but it was north of Rumbak where I was first and did the first thing. I hired a vet from Leh, brought him in. It cost me $10. I already had the vaccine because we'd been to USAID in Delhi. And people ask, well, why are you doing this? That's not your job as a photojournalist to do those things. And it's like, you can't walk away when you see a major problem and you have the opportunity to change it. You have to at least try, because why are you spending all this time, like I say, away from home? 50 below zero, sleeping in a tent and walking up and down those mountains for months.
It's hard work.
It's like, no, come on.
It's a bit easier these days, isn't it? But in terms of, again, that's where you're a bit different to other people out there in terms of people often go out and they get their images, and I'm talking about professional photographers here as well, and then they come away. But you've invested quite a lot of your time, energy, resource in terms to put constructive practices in place.
And the reason being is the first trip.
Yeah.
You know, because those biologists that Sharon were photographing and I was photographing, we had never been around scientists before. And instead of doing these many instances boring economic or news stories here, we were working with passionate, dedicated scientists that we love. Now, in the end, I worked better with local people because scientists have to leave in many instances, but still we were working with them. And so we took the lead from them.
I also wanted to add that, both Steve and my background is photojournalism.
Yeah.
And as a
I was going to say, can you define photojournalism as well? Because I think that helps.
So photojournalism, you're telling stories, right? So, I mean, the equivalent for a wildlife photojournalist, you're not just doing the equivalent of beautiful animal photographs, animal portraits. You know, you're talking about the people that live beside them, the entire ecosystem, system. You know, what they eat. The threats that face them, whether it's logging or hunting or deforestation, whatever it is.
Or
and then,
wildlife trafficking.
And then and then the conservation efforts to save them. So if you're going to tell the story of an animal as a journalist, photojournalist, it's not just the pretty pictures of the animals, it's the whole story. And Steve, his background, when Steve and I first met, he was photographing the coups in Haiti. He'd been down there many, many times. So he was an on the ground, photojournalist, doing a lot of news stories and later business stories. So he took that same, ethos, out into the jungle with him. Yeah. And, myself as well. And I do that kind of writing as well. We do the context.
It encapsulates it all.
Yes.
But then you've changed. How has technology in photography changed? Because I remember, I know it's a massive question, but I remember, I think one of the first images that another image that I loved of yours, I can't remember definitely snow leopards. And that was one of the first instances of amazing camera trap photography.
Well,
but a lot of people were like, that's not photography. And
that was easy for me to counter, very easy, because it was as confusing to me as it was to anyone else when I first started. When I decided to do that jaguar story, Rabinowitz said I would need to use camera traps or remote cameras. In the end, that failed miserably, and I had to find a place I could see him face to face. And that's what I said. I have to see these cats, because I just spent 18 months working with a cat that ended up dead because the loggers shot it as it walked through their hammocks in the jungle one night. And it took me 5 weeks to find out that they shot it, because no one would tell me they shot it because it was illegal. So in the end, I had to figure out how to use the traps. But from jaguars to snow leopards was 8-9 years. I just didn't use them when I did a bunch of other stories.
But, in the rainforest, it's really dark. And those were the days where, slide film, if you pushed some kind of Ektachrome or something, you'd get 400 or something. So, with a camera trap, he got one picture of a jaguar, but it was motion blur. Yeah. It was so dark. Yeah. So, it was very, very difficult.
But it ran in the magazine. It was cool. Nick thought it was great. You actually got movement on a camera trap to work.
But the difference now is, now you can go out with your iPhone and shoot in the dark of night and get
camera
photographs.
Traps have changed the whole sort of realm of photography and also conservation, haven't they?
Yeah, but to me, this is the deal. I am very anal about my composition because my father drilled that into me. So it was easy for me to say to people, and that's not photography, it's like, that first frame has to be a Steve Winter picture. So when I'm lying on the ground, putting the camera up, because the cameras are really low, so you're looking right up at an animal. Many cats have their heads down when they're walking, that I want to be eye to eye with them. I put an infrared beam, not a motion sensor, so it goes off instantly when they break the beam. So I have two people, one going this way, one going this way. And I compose the picture for the cat breaking the beam, going from left to right or right to left. And that is my composition. And the flashes are vitally important. I'm very anal. Nothing gets moved. I check them all the time. People are like, you can't go up there because then your smell's on it. I said, there is no place in the world that I've been working with there aren't hunters, or some kind of human. So I don't worry about that kind of stuff. But that is my picture. Everything else is icing on the cake. On snow leopards, I only got one picture, except in one place where it shot all 10 frames because it was marking a rock.
But that one picture really brought snow leopards into the...
That was it. He walked by and then turned around and walked away because there was a young subadult with the snow. And I didn't even enter that. I never entered a contest because I thought I already won. I wanted to be Nat Geo photographer since I was 8 years old. Sharon entered. I was gone somewhere on the next... I was in
behind your back.
I was in Kaziranga when she entered.
Right, yeah.
Doing the next story.
With the rhinos.
Yeah, Steve never... He went one story to the next. He always stayed in the field longer than he was paid for, just because, he was always driven to get the pictures that he wanted to get. And he really wasn't very well known. He'd just been doing story after story after story. And then I read about, the...
it was then BBC
Wildlife Photographer of the Year. And so I submitted his snow leopard pictures, and... they announced that award at the dinner at the Natural History Museum in London. So, because he was one of the 10 finalists, that then one of them would get the top award.
Award and a few other things.
Yeah, so we went, and they called his name, and he was crying on stage.
I couldn't talk.
It was amazing.
It shows what it means, though.
Yeah. I literally couldn't talk, And I was next to an Italian photographer. Once I came in, he goes, You're sitting next to me. The last time the Geographic photographer sat next to me was Nick Nichols, and he won. So now I know I'm not going to win. I said, you want to win? There's my editor right there sitting next to Brian Scary. I'll introduce you. And then he became a Geographic photographer, and he won the future. So he won anyway.
It all worked out.
It's like, that's that whole thing is giving back. That's part of this conservation thing. It's always about giving back, and you give back to your colleagues, you give back to the local people that are being negatively impacted by living with these animals that we as tourists want to see. And there's other things that we can do to help them, because the answers are there. Just so often, back then, these conservation organizations were like, we don't do people. And it's like, how in the hell can you not do people? There's no place you're working where these animals aren't being killed by people. So I guess if you want to save them, maybe you ought to work with people too.
Well, or even wide-ranging animals like elephants. They rip up crops, and there has to be some investment for local people to want to protect wildlife.
Yeah, and that's again, snow leopards is a great example of where that's worked now, and like with jaguars, and it's the fine balance, isn't it, between too much tourism and not enough, and getting those structures in place that work with that.
And Steve made a really important point about that. I mean, working with partners that have a conservation focus really is what makes ecotourism work, as opposed to not work. If it's just going to benefit a few, very wealthy hotel chains, that's really not going to do much for conservation. But if you're working with local people and hiring local people and supporting conservation in some way, and that money does go, to really help people, then ecotourism has really, really made a difference with a lot of species around the world.
Yeah. So, talking about species, tigers.
Tigers.
One of your favourites, really, I think, aren't they?
Well, we spent so much time working with tigers, and the difference, I think, in my work with tigers was, I said, because of my working with different conservation groups, I said, hey, to my editor, hey, Kathy Moran, there's her name, I say Kath, I'd like to do a couple subspecies, because I just went to a tiger meeting that included all conservation organizations. Everybody says the next tiger that will go extinct will be the Sumatran tiger. There are no wild pictures, except that are decades old, except for, trail cam shots. And I said I'd like to do Indo-Chinese also, because there's a great project in the Western Forest Complex on the Myanmar border that's been going on since the mid-'80s, started by Alan Rabinowitz.
Yeah.
So, but I want to go work with the Thai tiger team. So I got to spend a lot of time with tigers, trying to get one friggin' picture of either Sumatran or Indo-Chinese. But I got the story also. That led us, eventually to do other things, and then go back to India.
Which was the one where you were trying to set up camera traps for tigers, but the tigers were following you, I think, for a few days.
That happens so many
That's
places.
everywhere.
Yeah. And the same thing happened with jaguars. When I was first doing that, when I turned around, I was working with a Mayan guy in the northeastern, northern Belize. And I went back to where I was staying. Right in my rubber boot prints were the footprints of a jaguar. And Alan had told me about this happens, but that's
They're
fine.
They're curious and they're smart.
That's fine until it happens, and that's what helped me realize that these cats, are really not a threat to us. And that really helped when you're walking alone.
A tiger could be.
But you very infrequently walk alone, and in tiger territory, never. I would never walk alone there. And in Africa, I don't walk alone. Africa's the only place you got a guy with an elephant gun with you, Yeah. And they know how to react, because I have no background in this, and that's very important to work with people you trust implicitly. There's only been a couple of times that I can think of. One really stands out that I've just said, no, I'm not doing this. Everything else, the people I'm working with, I trust, because you're trusting them with your life.
Yeah.
And that's very important for someone that doesn't have a background in this. If, my family grew up in Kenya and I did also, it would be a completely different story.
Yeah.
But I grew up in Indiana, and
Yeah.
we have squirrels and raccoons.
It's not quite.
it.
Slightly different.
The only
No
predators I
rhinos.
had been around as a photojournalist were human predators.
Yeah. Tigers, more higher volume of tigers captive in the wild, I think, in America. Not in the wild in America, in captivity in America than in the wild.
Right.
Is that true? Is that
I'm
roughly?
not sure if that's
It's one of those
still the
stats that's
case.
bandied around, isn't it? But it's whether
It
it's,
was
whether it's
when
true
we
or
did
close.
it, probably, wasn't it?
When we first started looking into captive tigers in the United States, that definitely was true. But since then, and we had some contribution to that. Many of the large roadside zoos that were doing the heavy, constant breeding for the cub petting industry. You can only pet them until they're 3-4 months old, and then you need young cubs again. And then they were dumped, or all kinds of
We don't know.
pets
Yeah.
dumped, disappeared.
So,
So that cub petting industry made a captive tiger crisis in the United States. And at one point, there was an average of somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 tigers in the United States in captivity.
But that's when we
And
started.
not in zoos, not in the accredited zoos, right?
this is sort of private,
That-
inverted
well,
commas.
yes, and roadside zoos and private owners and an awful lot of it was this cub petting industry. Since then, the likes of Joe Exotic and the other large venues have all been put out of business because they've all been prosecuted for all kinds of crimes. And again, for everything from extreme animal abuse to financial fraud, nonprofit fraud. Joe Exotic, it was murder for hire.
Well, I was going to say, what the hell was that about Tiger King? That documentary it had such an impact in the UK, for example. I think it did worldwide, but correct me if I'm wrong, you guys were in there before.
We
Before,
spent 3 years.
You'd done the article, you'd done the photography, you'd sort of had it published, and it was all before this series.
All this change when we're talking about it, it's only been 5 years since we started doing this, but it's changed since then because of the
Dramatically.
story. I mean, Sharon wrote, 6,000 plus words. We got 30 pages because of her article.
in that
They
jail.
they said this is too good to edit. We're going to run it as is,
So this
and
was a
it's great.
serious investigation into this industry, and we found all kinds of illegal
Well, I was going to
activity.
say, talk me through how you did that, because you did it in a... How did you get these people to talk to you in the first place? That's very difficult.
If you watch Tiger King, it's because they're egos. you know?
Right.
I spent 9 days with Doc Antle because he knew me, but
We were
he
at
knew
Joe
my
Exotic's
work.
place 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Joe Exotic's niece still calls me up. I mean,
Right.
the
She's
thing
talked
is,
to Joe in jail.
oh,
a
I
lot,
had an
you know.
email correspondence with Joe in jail over smartjailmail.com was the venue, which is the best, right? But we corresponded for 6 months.
On what?
Well, I
Getting info from him.
right, and it was.
But
it was,
about the trade, about this sort of industry,
well,
or about...
I was trying to find out more about the illegal activity. According to U.S. law, it's illegal to sell an endangered species across state lines, and that's a very strong law, the Lacey Act, right? So, what they would do is they would drive animals all over the place because you need the cubs, right? You may not have a cub at that time, even if you're breeding, and you need constant cubs for tourists to pet. And, depending on the venue, some of them, charge, we did the math. Doc Antle made a really conservative lowest end estimate. He made 50 grand in a day when we were there. In May, like 3 years ago.
And that's from petting? Or...
Well, yes, and these tours.
He had
and,
animal show.
Yeah.
But it revolves
But
around you getting a tiger cub in your lap and then getting your picture taken.
So
By that, then,
it's
no
big,
cameras allowed.
It was big money, but it was everything from animal abuse violates the Endangered Species Act, of which tigers are an endangered species. and then, illegal trafficking, and then there was all kinds of money laundering, and all these places claimed they were nonprofit, but they weren't, so it was nonprofit fraud.
Nonprofit.
So, I mean, there's layers and layers and layers of illegal activity. So I was digging in, and we were undercover for a long time. And initially we went to these places as tourists, and Steve would go in with one camera, and I often wouldn't even have a camera, depending. There were some places you weren't allowed to take pictures at all. And then eventually, we had to come out because Steve had to then get pictures. So he would go on his own to those, because if you Googled me, what comes up is my tiger temple investigation that uncovered, trafficking from a cub petting venue in Thailand into the trade. You Google Steve and you see beautiful animal pictures.
Yeah.
So he could get in kind of on that, right? And then, then I would go back with him because I would then have to be there. The ambiance was very, very different. Then they were really cagey.
I mean, Doc Antle was fine, but as soon as Sharon came, it was a different story. But he liked, I brought my stepson, and, we were treated like buds,
Yeah.
Everybody's shooting pictures and hanging out with the guys, right?
His son's got, millions of followers on Instagram, and they would be doing pictures.
And then when I went back,
them doing
even
that.
on tape, the first interview I'm doing with him, we're all sitting around there, he looks at me, and he's a big, intimidating, scary guy, right? He looks at me and says, "Better not write anything bad about me. There's going to be a bomb in your mailbox."
No, that was the last thing he said.
So that was the difference.
And we had two Zoom recorders sitting right in front of him. He didn't care.
Yeah, no, it was being recorded.
So what motivated you to do that project? And
it definitely came from the Tiger Temple, because I can't tell you what it felt like to have something like that happen. I mean, Sharon never gave up. She kept writing the story, like I said, but
about Tiger Temple.
Yeah, about Tiger Temple. But there was the same thing.
Okay, let me go to the beginning there.
I was gonna say,
their whole thing was about cubs too.
Yeah, tell us a bit about the Tiger Temple. Yeah.
So we did the Tigers Forever book, right? Yeah. And we had heard, or he had heard through the grapevine,
spent 4 days
when
there.
he was in Thailand, that this tiger petting place might be trafficking, and there had been probably 100 articles done by global press about Tiger Temple, and all of them saying they might be trafficking, but nobody dug in. And then this woman who had spent time there as part of her master's research on Indo-Chinese tigers, she had seen things there that she knew there was trafficking, and she became a dog with a bone. And she stumbled onto some information over years that she really wanted to share with a journalist. And she had seen our book, and she trusted us, so she reached out to me. I worked very closely with her for a year. Steve joined us in Thailand once we finally went there at the very end of this story. And, we went and confronted them with documents, that showed tiger trades to Laos, and had them on video as we're handing them the documents. And we also met with the, there was an insider who gave us information. We had to meet him in a safe house. I mean, Thailand is dangerous. I mean, this was a thing. It was really great that Steve and I could pool resources and go do that. But we were able to prove that these tigers that were being used, for cub petting, they were also being killed on site and smuggled into the Asian wildlife trade to China, because in China, skins and tiger bone wine are worth a lot of money, as well as canines and other body parts for traditional Chinese medicine. So this is a really high-end, lucrative trade. This is not like some middle class.
So you had the petting side of it, but then it was almost a factory producing.
Exactly.
Because when I was working with the Tiger team, I asked them, how many tigers do they have? And they said they always have 150. So
at this temple.
And it was like, then I went there, and then they said, they knew who I was, and I was National Geographic, and they said, we have a morning thing where you can pet cubs and, bottle feed them. And I said, well, I'd like to photograph that. So they let me do that. And then when we went back 2 years later, it was, we went the first day without seeing who we were. And then we had to go back to Bangkok and did something at the ministry, and then called them the next time we were going, and I said who I was, and they said, oh, we remembered you. We thought that was you. And you want to come here and oh, we need your help. Thanks so much for coming to save us because we're getting all this bad press. I did not say a word, and we went.
They actually not.
They let us do bunches
but they
of
let
stuff.
us see stuff that they shouldn't let us see.
So
I didn't say
yeah.
They just
anything
didn't get it, right?
to incriminate. I didn't say anything that we're there to save you. I said we're doing something for National Geographic, and we'd like to come back out and film. Oh, come on! And then the
they thought it
woman,
was the
she was
inverse.
getting teared up. She was so happy I was there.
And then at the
'cause
end
she
of the
remembered
day,
me.
when I'm sitting down, with a monk who's also signed this traffic document,
Yeah.
like with a tiger farm in Laos, then that was that changed.
Yeah.
So in any case, long story short, that story when it ran in National Geographic kicked off a national and international fervor, and both the Ministry of Environment was bombarded with letters and emails, and there was so much press. And under great pressure, they went in and shut down the Tiger Temple, and they
As a result of
confiscated all
Yeah.
178 tigers. Now, the reason it's important, yes, it's an animal abuse issue, and it's horrible, right? And it's a legal wildlife trade, which is directly connected to all kinds of other cartel involvement, because it is, international, illegal organizations that mastermind wildlife trafficking globally. So it's a national security issue, wildlife trade. These farms are also, it is a terrible abuse situation. But the other thing is, as long as there are sources feeding this trade, it still stimulates poaching in the wild.
Yeah.
And we're down to about 4,000 tigers in the wild, of which about 1,900, 2,000 are Bengals. So, there's 2,000 tigers split up between the other 4 subspecies.
Yeah.
That's a couple of hundred each. They're almost gone. And the South China tiger exists only in captivity in China.
Yeah.
So,
And
it's
15 in
this
South
is
Africa.
when you really look at this, if you're going after these cub petting industries and in that sense also illegal trade, it also protects tigers in the wild, and that's the only reason I did it. And I knew nothing about captive wildlife until this woman, Sybil Foxcroft, came to me with these tips about the Thai Tiger Temple and said, "Hey, will you do this with me?"
Amazing.
And
it
then
wasn't,
from there, we found out that this was also happening in the U.S.
Right.
And so that led to the.
And so that led to that. And now
But-
we're back to doing wild stuff again.
But I was going to say, so on the wild side though, you travel a lot. What are the biggest issues you see in regards to that wildlife is facing in regards to conservation, etc.? You've travelled so many different corners of the world. What is it? Is it poaching? Is it overpopulation? Is it deforestation?
Number one is habitat loss.
Always,
But
always.
a close second at this point is wildlife trade, depending on the species. And then way up there is climate change. And that continues to become more and more of an issue. Again, whether it's, floods or drought or heat, whatever it is, the world is changing in a way that is dissembling ecosystems and making it hard for, species to survive in many, many places.
And that's what it's all about, is the health of an ecosystem. People have to realize that the health of humans, animals, and ecosystems are inextricably linked. And we've seen that now during COVID so much,
Yeah.
And we do see that. And, you have to put revenge killings in there also in that list, because you have that a lot also where, even if a farmer in Africa loses one cow, I was working with a former assistant who did Tree Climbing Lions of Uganda, which is on Disney Plus, and they lost the whole pride in one night, 11 lions, even though it was in an ecotourism area, and everybody hated the guy after that. But 3 weeks later, another pride came in and took over a pride they didn't even know existed.
Which,
you have to, and one thing I wanted to say about the Tiger Temple is when they went in to take those tigers out, they found 20 cubs in jars and how many tigers hanging from meat hooks in the freezer. So it's
Where
like
was this? This was
in Thailand.
Yeah.
So they didn't just come to take the tigers out. What they saw, made them realize that what had been written about by Sharon and investigated by Sharon and Foxcroft was true.
Well, not only that, it was far more gruesome than anybody even
far more
imagined.
gruesome.
Yeah.
I mean, and when we did the first thing, Thai media came in and took my pictures off of Instagram, took the video off the Nat Geo site, and ran all 7.5 minutes of it on national news. So that kind of stuff's real important. And they took Sharon article and ran the whole thing in the newspapers, in the Bangkok Post. So all that stuff helped because people couldn't believe that monks would do this.
And I was going to say, how do you have an impact on that everyday people have an impact on conservation or climate change, etc. But is it just about by being informed, by reading this information that is often out there? Because sitting here listening to you guys, and I sort of work on the fringes of what you do, and there's a heck of a lot I realise that I don't know and not aware of.
I think it's very important to educate the public about many things. And first and foremost, it is really important to share the beauty and the wonder and the magic of nature. And we all know how healing it is. You're stressed out, you go for a walk in the woods, you feel better. We need nature too for our own, well-being. And I think it's very important for people to remember the beauty. And then to, take it one step further. I mean, very few of us are educated to understand how interrelated an ecosystem is, and to value a forest and all its inhabitants, right?
But I think that was when COVID first hit, and I said this a couple of times. I was quite optimistic. You saw the cities shutting down, and in the UK, deer walking down the street. There weren't any jet trails in the sky and stuff, and I was quite hopeful that things were going to change. And we're guilty as the next person, in terms of the company, the machines are being cranked up again straight away, aren't they? We haven't really changed our perspective, and I think that's quite sad, is that...
Well, let's face it, we live in a modern society. We're not going to give up our cars and start walking when we have to go 400 miles somewhere. I mean, we live in a modern society, but there are smart decisions to be made. People can make choices about their electricity use. People can choose to bike instead of driving in some situations. We can recycle. We can choose to buy products that are eco-friendly. We can, choose to vote for leaders that want to fight climate change and, limit toxic chemicals and plastics and the kinds of things that are really damaging the planet. We can support conservation and other organizations that we know are really making a difference on the ground, which a lot of times it's the small local ones rather than the big ones.
I would say the grassroots
that are really making a difference. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that any individual can do. I mean, look at some of the individuals that have made such a huge difference in this world. They're an individual, right? It's one person. Greta, Jane Goodall. There's people that become committed to something and their voice makes a difference. Not all of us are going to be famous, but we can all make choices in our daily lives that really do move the needle if we all do something.
So, final question then. What would you guys like your legacy to be, if we want to call it that, when you sort of finally hang up the camera, which I don't know if you ever will.
Oh, no, I'll be hanging up the camera when I fall over.
Yeah, exactly.
And walk into a jungle somewhere. But we're photographers, we don't have any back. We don't have the
retirement
401ks, retirement and all that.
But nor would we want to.
What would be the message?
No,
that you'd
because
want
we love it.
Come up with what is your message?
Well, I think that just look at what I've done in my career, and it took doing these Nat Geo Live talks to actually to look at it in a different way, because I was on this treadmill from one story to the next, because that's how we make money. So in the end, with Sharon and I doing the story, doing the talk together, putting it together, was to be able to realize, oh yeah, I never thought that those 3 jaguar pictures actually did what they did. But I was actually told that, hey, people started coming in now for tourism. The buses that used to be full of birders that would come from Cuyaba down the Pantanero Highway would never go to the end of the road. They would turn around where the ranger station was at, which was 25 minutes from the end of the road. There was no reason for them to go, because the birds were, all along the road. But once Jags came, it was there. And then snow leopards. I didn't need to hire that vet, but to me it was just like, this is so hard. These people have such hard lives, and they'll benefit. If they lose 30% of their herd every year to disease, and I happen to have a whole case of hoof and mouth vaccine in my backpack, and you want to start this with Snow Leopard Conservancy India, this project where we run it for 3 years, then they take over. You're putting 30% more money in their pocket as long as they promise not to go snow leopards.
Yeah.
And they followed that. They followed it for sure. And then the next story is there's something else like that. You keep doing it because you care about the legacy of the animal also, and trying to help the people out. Bottom line is, when I said I work with scientists, but I've ended up relying on local people a lot because I live in their homes and things like that. You see their problems and you can give them answers, and answers that help them have a better life, that they can have schools and medical care. That's why I always wanted to work with African Parks, with seeing them bring in things that people really need.
Great organization, yeah.
And if I can be helpful in any way, shape, or form like that, by just being there doing a story for National Geographic, then that to me is great, and that is part of a legacy.
Definitely.
That
definitely.
you help change things for the better for the animal and the local people that live with them.
So a massive thank you to Steve and Sharon for that conversation. Intriguing to hear about their years working with big cats, camera trapping, with the Tiger King, etc. as well. If you want to follow more about them, Steve can be followed on at Steve Winter Photo for Instagram, and his website is stevewinterphoto.com. Thank you.